Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I see people are still coming in, and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as you enter this meeting. My name is Katie Gurin, and I'm going to be facilitating this talk. I'll have you muted throughout, but please do feel free to introduce yourself and ask questions in the chat. Before we begin, 350 Humboldt would like to acknowledge that where we live and hold our meetings in Humboldt County is on unceded territory and the ancestral homeland of Indigenous nations, which include Tolowa, Hoopa, Karuk, Mattole, Wailaki, Wiyot, and Yurok. We thank Indigenous nations who have been caretakers of the land. Additionally, we recognize that the well-being of all people is bound up with that of Indigenous peoples, and we must all take action on climate. So today we're very fortunate to have 3 Humboldt alums here to discuss electric vehicle charging access. Our panelists will include the public, will address the public charger access gap statewide and take a closer look at public chargers in Humboldt. They'll also discuss equitable charger deployment examples and alternative charging solutions across the US. So now for some logistics. As I said before, you'll be muted throughout the talk. Chih-Wei, Ian, and Derek will speak for 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have another 30 minutes for Q&A. You'll enter your questions in the chat and we'll answer them in the order that they were received. This talk will be recorded and posted on our website, world.350.org/Humboldt. And hopefully you'll visit our website, and please do sign up for 350 Humboldt updates there. We'd love to get more people involved in the climate movement on the North Coast. I want to thank co-sponsors, including the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, Temple Bethel, Cooperation Humboldt, the Climate Action Campaign of the Humboldt Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, 11th Hour, the Redwood Region Chapter of the Sierra Club, and the Environmental Protection Information Center. I also want to thank Pat Carr and Haley Connors-Keith of 350 Humboldt for all their work to organize and promote this event. Lastly, I want to extend a hearty thanks to our speakers, Chih-Wei Hsu, Anh Bui, and Derek Ichien for generously donating their time and energy to come speak to us. Chih-Wei, Anh, and Derek are all Humboldt alums who have gone on to work for clean energy nonprofits. Chih-Wei is currently an associate researcher on the electric vehicles team of the International Council on Clean Transportation. Since joining the ICCT as a fellow in 2020, he's worked on accelerating transportation electrification by supporting policymakers in charging infrastructure planning. In his prior research, he studied equity in electric vehicle adoption and charging infrastructure deployment in California, as well as energy access in low and middle income countries. He studied energy technology and policy at Humboldt State University, and apparently when he's not working, you can find him perfecting his abstract latte art. Anh Bui is an associate researcher on the ICCT electric vehicles team as well. After joining the ICCT in 2020, Anh has focused on electric vehicle adoption and infrastructure planning for cities in the US. Anh has a BS from Elizabethtown College, Pennsylvania in biology and anthropology, and an MS from Humboldt State University in environmental systems. And lastly, I want to thank Derek Ichien, who's a project manager with CalSTART. His role involves supporting data collection, analysis, and communication on a range of innovative mobility projects, including fleet electrification, multimodal transportation solutions, and clean energy infrastructure. Previously, Derek served as a senior project coordinator for the electric vehicle infrastructure team at the Center for Sustainable Energy in San Diego. He's also worked to identify and implement cost-effective energy efficiency solutions for several public schools throughout our beautiful county. Derek holds both an MS in Energy Technology and Policy from HSU and a BS in Environmental Science from HSU. Again, thanks so much to the 3 of you for being here with us. And with that, I'll turn things over to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Really happy to be here. And I'll just lead us off and to start a presentation. I probably don't have to go through our names again, but I'm Chih-Wei, and let's jump. Oh, get a slide going. There you go. So before getting into the main topic today, which is chargers, electric vehicle chargers, just want to do a quick background on electric vehicles or electric cars in general. And by talking about the benefits and barriers of adopting one. And so let's start with benefits. So what are the benefits? The biggest one is there's zero tailpipe emissions. So it's great for greenhouse gas emission reduction. And this is huge because transportation sector is the biggest emitting sector in California, accounting for about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And then the percentage is even higher in more rural counties, such as Humboldt County, where transportation emissions account for about 50% of the county's emissions. So the clear benefit of adopting a zero emission vehicle has a great benefit in terms of meeting our climate goals for this county and the state. And the second benefit of adopting an electric vehicle is the cost saving component for the owner or the operator. That's because electricity costs less in terms of per mile compared to gasoline price per mile. And also there are just less moving parts in the electric vehicle. So it's a lot cheaper to operate and maintain compared to a conventional gas car. And a recent study done by our colleague at ICC found that approximately 7% of the annual income can be saved for lowest income households by adopting EVs. And that's a group that oftentimes spend more than 50% of income on housing and transportation. So EV has a lot of benefit, and especially so for low-income households. But what are some of the barriers? There are three that I want to talk about here. And the first one is upfront cost. Still today, electric vehicles are more expensive to buy compared to gas cars. But many different studies have projected the cost parity to come around 2025 or latest 2030. So we are sort of getting rid of that first barrier right now. And the second barrier is the range of the first few models. A lot of times have a range that may be lower than 100 miles, and that might not be sufficient for someone that want to just solely rely on a electric vehicle. But again, that's also another barrier that's coming down, because a lot of models that came out last year with this year or next year is hitting about 250 to 300 mile range. So we are getting rid of this for sort of soon, getting rid of those two barriers. But the third one that's going to be our focus today is charging infrastructure or charger access. Unlike the first two barriers, where those two are market-wide barriers, cost and quality of the product, charger access is more localized. It can differ city to city, houses to house, region to region. So it's slightly more tricky. There's a little bit more thought needs to be put into. And there's three specific parts that we're going to talk about today. And each of us will take on a component here. First is the charger need and gap, which I'll be talking about. And then will be followed by Anh talking about how do we build in equity into designing some of the charger incentive programs, as well as showing some of the examples, example programs around the US and California. And then Derek would talk about how exactly do chargers get put in the ground by talking through the implementation process of chargers, and also in that process, where can we get more local inputs or get people more involved to improve access of the charger. So let's jump in the first section, charging need and gap. So right now there are about 560 EVs on the road in California, served by about 67,000 public chargers, as shown by the orange line on the figure here. And the figure shows that on x-axis, you can see the chargers, and then y-axis, different type of chargers. There are workplace chargers, public chargers, multi-unit dual-link chargers, apartments, and DC fast chargers. And in the pipeline, there's about another 121,000 chargers that's coming in. And that put us where that purple line is on that figure. As you can see, that's still a huge, we still got a long way to go to hit even the baseline, which is 5 million electric vehicles, as shown in the green color on the figure, which we need about 1 million chargers to serve about 5 million zero emission vehicles. And then on a more aggressive and a more updated state goal, we need about 8 million of electric vehicles to hit the climate goal. And we need about 1.5 million chargers for those by 2030. So we do have a gap in terms of absolute numbers. We need a lot more chargers, but we also see a gap in terms of different group of population having access to chargers, right? So we found that there are lower access at locations with lower income or at locations with non-white majority. You can see this figure on the right. We have 3 different population studied here: the Asian majority neighborhoods, Black and Hispanic majority neighborhoods, and white majority neighborhoods. And you see the blue line, which shows the no majority neighborhoods, kind of serving as a reference group. And we see when we look at all the public chargers on the street in the state right now, Black and Hispanic majority neighborhoods have the lowest access to them. And then we thought, okay, then how about the public funded chargers? We think, okay, those chargers should have, especially because the program design has equity component in there. We're thinking there would be a smaller gap between groups, but it's disheartening to see that when we look at public funded chargers, the access gap is actually widened. As you can see here, now we've only looked at public funded chargers, mainly through the Cal EVIP program. The Black and Hispanic group actually further decreasing their access to chargers, and they're only about half as likely to have charger access to white majority neighborhoods. So we have charging gap in terms of absolute numbers, also disparities between groups. And now if we look at, and I forgot to mention, so that's sort of hinting at the program design has not yet delivered on equity, even though that is a focus of the program, but the result hasn't seemed to suggest that's the outcome. So let's shift to talking about Humboldt County. So here's a map of the chargers available in Humboldt County right now. And right now we have about 87 level 2 charger plugs and 21 DC fast plugs, and of which 8 of those are Tesla chargers. And that puts Humboldt at about 13 EVs to 1 charger, actually pretty high on the charger deployment ranking. Around the state, California is averaging about 25 EVs to a charger to 30 EVs to a charger. If we look at the same map and then we map the charging, the service area of those chargers by driving time, you see 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes driving from the public chargers. You actually see most of the majority of the population center in the county is covered by at least within a 20-minute drive of the charger. And if we only look at 5-minute drive to a charger, about 20% of the population is within 5-minute drive to a charger. But I want to note here that, even though you are able to get to the charger within 5 minutes, that doesn't mean it's where you're going to go spend your time. And you don't want to sit in the parking lot somewhere with nothing around you and wait 2-3 hours just for the charge. So having access, having one located near you is not the same as that fits your travel style or your lifestyle or your planning. And we also see there are 3 pockets in the county that seems a geographic coverage gap. And the first one, starting from south of the county, you see between Governville and Realdale, there's a stretch currently not served by any public charger. And higher up, you have north in the eastern part of the county, Hoopa. And then in the north, you have Trinity, north of Trinity to the end of the northern end of the county. And I want to especially highlight Hoopa and the southern stretch. Those area actually has a pretty high density of buildings, so it is beneficial to start thinking about closing the geographic coverage, starting with these 2 locations first. And now we look at the gaps right now. We want to also look at looking into the future in 2025 and 2030. How many chargers will we need in the county? And this is all in the backdrop of California's goal to reach 100% EV sales by 2035. I think the overall story here is we just need a lot more chargers. In 2025, we need about 6 times more. In 2030, another 2.4 times more. In total, within the 10 years, we need to increase charger count by about 14 times in the county. And there's the same category shown in the first statewide figure. And I want to point out 2 things. About 20% in 2025 and 2030, about 20% of the chargers will be needed at multi-unit dwellings or apartments. And about 40% or a little bit more than 40% will be needed at workplace. And in workplace, especially, they're sometimes a lot of times they're dual purpose chargers. They can also be used as public chargers, say after work at nighttime. So just want to highlight that point there. Right, so those are some of the gaps that we're seeing statewide and county, and I want to just close this section up with reviewing some of those. So absolute number wise, we need a lot more chargers, and also that also means a lot of investments needed. And this investment right here in the first block there you see is only for public chargers, so that's only for public level 2 and DC fast chargers. And we also need to close the geographic service coverage gap, especially for Hoopa and the stretch between Realdale and Garberville. And lastly, I didn't talk about this specifically, but apartments buildings in the county, they're 10% of household live in apartments. And apartments have the special challenge in accessing home chargers, because usually it's harder to get chargers in there. As Derek later will talk about a little bit more about this. But one thing I want to note is that in lower income parts of the county, people live in the apartment, percentage of people living in the apartment is actually higher. So looking in downtown Arcata and the surrounding areas, there's about 40% of household living in apartments. So that's another access gap that we need to address there. And last one, local economy. It might sound a little weird that why I'm talking about this here, but charging isn't just for charger isn't just for drivers. It's also about local business having access to the economic opportunities brought by these chargers, people visiting the businesses, and then also local contractor and et cetera. So these are the three gaps that I and Derek will sort of talk about some of the potential ways we can address this. And I'll pass over to Anh to talk about some of the how to build inequity and some program designs and examples.
Super cool, Chih-Wei. Well, Chih-Wei did drop a little hint about a little bit of charger access gap within Humboldt County. So we definitely got a little view of the technical charger needs in Humboldt, and then what can we do to make sure that Humboldt get funding overall, and make sure that equity is used as a guiding principle in order to get Humboldt to get funding, or also even in implementation process. So I'd like to encourage us to think a little bit broader, a little bit more about equity in program planning, in program design. As some of you might know, there's a CAEVIP program, the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure project that Derek might go a little deeper later on. But the current program, is designed to help implement public chargers in many communities. And the program has been very effective in prioritize rapid infrastructure development. And sometimes it does so much that some of the incentive programs have been fully subscribed almost immediately after the program launch. So this means that many higher need applicants, for example, like Humboldt rural, underserved, disadvantaged communities with the most barrier to participation is unable to compete with the very limited resources. So just think about like program designing, like what can they do to make sure that Humboldt County can get access to the resources. So program design at high level, like how EVIP got to think about eligibility criteria, what type of entity should apply, and especially we want DAC's community to apply. And then now people and then this is where humble public servant like us, like people like us, can come in and say, talk to Congress or so, like, hey, please, like, consider more funding to our communities where, like, we don't actually have a lot of resources. So this is where, Humboldt 350 or any of us can actually take actions and talk to local representative and congressmen to help get more funding into the community. And then after you say we get to revise the eligibility criteria, the funding program got to make sure that everyone be able to understand the instructions, the criteria, ensure that everybody have access access to user-friendly information. So in my research work, I've been looking at cities, programs, utilities website, and a lot of them do have, for example, information on electric vehicles and some information on funding available, but many of them use languages or don't even provide different languages to describe the program. So like many program definitely needs to be more accessible to different groups in order to, we can utilize all the funding at max capacity. And now after people, get the information about the program, what can we do to make sure that community, make sure that our funding criteria or the people that get funding are the one that need it the most. That is when program design can think about the outcomes, think about what sort of outcome of the public charger implementation program would bring. Is it going to be 25% would be in a disadvantaged community of the funding in 25% in the disadvantaged community, or a broader, like 30% should be in disadvantaged community. So that is some of the outcome that program design implementation should think about when they think about funding. And then after that, like all these steps that I've mentioned here so far are kind of interconnected in a way. We need to make sure that all these rubrics that we grade funding, like giving out funding, make sure that like all that information is also available. That kind of go back to step 2, make sure that all the information are publicly available for the people who want to apply. Or and then the last step, well, I wouldn't say like last step, everything is quite interconnected, is making sure that all the applicants that get the support they need to apply, especially for the first-time applicants. They need more tech assistance, they need more outreach, like programming, to make sure they reach all the applicants that they want the outcome that the outcome will support them. So those are just a generic conceptual ideas for equity when we think about program design. And again, as I mentioned earlier, like Humboldt folk can definitely have a lot of voices in these steps at even like the higher state level, like talking to your congressman, local representative, to think about the designing, implementing the program within the community. So on the next slide, it's just like based on my experience, I'm just pointing out some of the really fun examples. I think it's very creative way that that these programs I'm mentioning are building in equity within their program design. For example, I found LA, their program, or not their program, it's approach that they are trying to, that they're working on, is LA Dignity Infused Community Engagement, or DICE strategy. So this is an approach that they try to make sure that there's cross-sector effort to center community members in their planning. So it's not necessarily about public charging, making sure that public charging out there. It's just overall making sure that community has a lot of voices in this planning process. So they go out, talk to the community. They make sure there's specialists working with the community. They make sure that they also pay the community member for efforts and inputs along with city staff. So this is one the approach to make sure that they have less eliminate traffic-related deaths in Los Angeles. So in a way that make that talking with the community, they are able to identify where the funding should go. And then they also have capacity building trainings, making sure that all project partners have support and institutional knowledge for successful partnering in the project. And the next one I'm having here is a New Orleans resident survey for public charging. So this one's very focused on public charger. I think it's just really fun for a community member to be able to drop a pin into the map, say we want chargers here. So it's very interactive. You'll be able to get the input from the community to know where they want chargers, and then from then you might be able to think about, funding wise, how much do we need, and even after you already got the funding, now you revisit this map and say, okay, like where should we prioritize putting the chargers? So, having this interactive map or it's really fun, especially for community member who want to get more involved in that. They also see other folks dropping in their opinions or so. So it's one of very interesting like planning effort. It's a partnership between the city and utility, and like for Humboldt, definitely RCA has a lot of say in this part. And then the last one, I mean, I have a lot of work. I have done a lot of work with LA. Well, I guess not a lot of work, but some experience working with Los Angeles. So I'm just doing shameless plug for Los Angeles here. Again, it's definitely a different landscape than Humboldt. But I think it's just really interesting to figure out what other cities or communities have been doing across the United States and lesson learned from these programs. Like, can we apply it to Humboldt, or, any lessons is valuable. So like Blue LA, it's a car sharing program in Los Angeles where they focus on low income disadvantaged communities. So here the rate is quite low. It's really low. The rate for people to rent the car is quite low. It started around 2016, and they already have published a report about lesson learned. And in a lot of that, what I pulled out is they definitely need a lot more funding in outreach. So it's definitely a big part in realizing equity, making sure equity is a focus of the program. Because if you don't have enough outreach, how do you know like what's the community needs and where should you put the chargers or so? So Blue LA program is still going on right now, and it's still providing public transportation basically for low income community. And so yeah, like these are like some of the examples. Like I'm jumping from theory wise over to some of the examples I find interesting in making sure like local community has a lot of voices in the planning process. So yeah, so these are on the process in the planning, and now I know it's Derek's turn to probably talk more about the implementation process, which is very exciting.
Well, thanks, Anh. And yeah, so Chih-Wei has spoken to kind of the overall need at a state level and within the Humboldt County region, identifying where the gaps are, what the general need is over the next few years. And Anh mentioned kind of bringing it all together and looking at how other programs in other parts of the country have successfully implemented equity into their EV charger incentive programs and the like. But I really want to drill down into kind of what I've spent the past few years doing, and that's looking at actually implementing, installing, and commissioning chargers. So, Chih-Wei, can I get the next slide, please? So overall, whether a charging station is public or private, the installation itself tends to follow a pretty similar path. The 6 main steps that you see in front of you are adapted from a permitting guide published by the California Governor's Office of Business, or GoBiz, in July 2019. And it actually partially builds on knowledge developed by the Schatz Center and by our CEA. So we'll take a really quick second, go through all of them quickly, and then we'll focus in on the most important step to building out a fair and equitable charging network here on the North Coast. So yeah, everything starts with exploring your options. The first thing with any charging installation is finding a site that's actually interested in putting chargers in the ground. From there, you talk to your utility, in this case PG&E,
or an electrician about what kind of charging that that site can actually support, and how much it's actually going to cost in order to make any necessary electrical infrastructure upgrades. Not every site is going to be a good candidate for charging due to the cost of trenching and running conduit, or sometimes other restrictions come up, but it's always worth a conversation. From there, you'll start preparing for the actual installation process. So that means deciding on the specific equipment that you want to install and working through the permitting process with the city or county, depending on who has jurisdiction over that site. From there, it's a matter of just executing on your plans, finding a contractor and going through construction, ensuring that the site complies with all necessary building code requirements and ADA laws, and then finishing up by commissioning and deploying infrastructure and actually getting juice into vehicles. So while measures can be taken to actively promote a distribution of charges that's fair at each of these steps, because of the way most incentive programs are structured and kind of a still burgeoning familiarity with EVs and infrastructure, getting site hosts excited about and engaged with EVs before more incentive programs end up launching will end up playing a disproportionately large role in making EVs accessible and an easy choice for communities throughout the county. And that's simply because it takes the chicken and the egg problem and it just goes, okay, yeah, the chicken came first in this case. So looking at all of you guys that have chosen to attend today, thank you for being here. As members of the larger community who are, already looking at this issue through an equity standpoint, you're kind of in a unique position where you can start working and talking with any potential sites in underserved areas to help position them to very quickly take advantage of any future grants that are aimed at funding more EV charging infrastructure. And Chih-Wei, can I get 2 clicks from you? So the first step in siting is to think about where the holes are in infrastructure and in EV adoption, and answer the questions: why are those holes there, and where are the logical fill points? And so one of the things to keep in mind is that incentive programs love to deploy chargers in rural or underserved settings, but there's typically not a whole lot of outreach done, especially if the funding is allocated at a state or utility level. Those programs typically rely on community members or local organizations or developers to actually bring in sites. And so in a previous life, I worked on Cali VIP, which I briefly touched on. And that program is a first come, first serve opportunity. And time again, we get calls from people who are interested in they have this awesome site in a portion of the state, and they saw an ad for the program and they called in, but the program launched 2 weeks earlier and funding had already gone away. Because it does tend to turn over really quickly. And so from a high level standpoint, the best thing that the advice that we would give to people is, try and stay engaged with your local community-based organizations. For Humboldt County, that's RCEA. RCEA is on top of new legislation and funding opportunities, and they can help guide that process. And the second thing would be, have sites in mind who have gone through the process, who have thought about, okay, where do I want to put chargers in? What chargers do I want to put in? What do I need to do in order to get them in the ground? And that way they're ready and able to go pull that trigger as soon as funding is made available. So on sites themselves, typically effective sites tend to be visible and convenient parts of people's everyday lives. As Chih-Wei said, this can be grocery stores, community centers, downtown corridors, that sort of thing. Looking within the gaps that Chih-Wei outlined and identifying places like this and reaching out to see if they'd be interested in maybe possibly potentially hosting an EV charger can make a huge difference in terms of making chargers easily accessible. Me, myself, I live in an apartment where it's not feasible for me to put an EV charger in. I rent, and so I talked with my landlord, and they were just like, do you really want to do that? You'll be paying for all the work, etc. And it's cost prohibitive for me. But because I have a good charging network of public chargers down here in San Diego, it actually makes it so that I don't have to expend that additional amount of money. It makes owning an EV a little bit more accessible because I don't have to go through the need to actually build in an EV charger to my place of residence. But I do want to state that not all sites are created equal. Like I kind of alluded to, the challenges and benefits that are associated with installing charging at like an Arcata or an HSU apartment complex looks very different from the challenges associated with making chargers available at places like the Freshwater Grange or at the Peg House, even though I know it's not in Humboldt County, but bear with me. You know, the Peg House is right on 101, but due to its rural location and its age, it may not have the best electrical connection. Putting chargers in could help draw more people in off the highway to spend time and to have a burger and a brownie, and allow for other community members to feel like they have a place to charge without actually having to expend any money of their own on their own personal charging infrastructure. But the utility connection and possible need for upgraded service can be an issue for older properties like that. Meanwhile, at apartment complexes and MUDs, you know, there may be a lot of demand for EV chargers, but you get concerns on electrical bills and how parking spaces work and how they're shared and how that all works. And while these issues can usually be mitigated by using innovative charging solutions, it is going to be important to allay any sort of site host concerns in order to move forward with that process. Chih-Wei, can I get the next slide, please? So again, I served for a brief time working with the technical assistance line for the Cali VIP program, and we had a couple of recurring roadblocks that site hosts would run into, or that infrastructure programs would run into. And the first one was a complete lack of interest from site hosts, especially in the absence of funding mechanisms. And that could happen for a number of reasons. Most frequently, it was a concern over cost, an unfamiliarity with what site hosts would be responsible for, and any benefits that site hosts could achieve from installing EV chargers. And for the greater Humboldt community, you know, one of the things that we recommended in one of our studies was, you know, keep tabs on any existing or upcoming incentive programs for charging infrastructure. From there, it's all about identifying and dialoguing with potential site hosts on the potential benefits of installing chargers at those sites, and then actually hooking those sites up with local electrical contractors and with RCEA for technical assistance. And I do want to note that RCEA is currently in the process of looking for, or they're currently looking for partners to do a cost share agreement with on the last $100,000 that are available through the Humboldt County Cali VIP project. So if anyone on this call happens to know anyone who is looking at installing a publicly available EV charger at their place of business, please reach out to them, email them at ev@redwoodenergy.org, or go ahead and call the RCEA main line. Second problem that frequently came up was that it's really hard to actually install chargers. In Humboldt County, you know, this looks like old housing stock, knob and tube wiring, small panels, because no one in the 1950s ever saw EVs coming. Well, we can get into history another time. Apartment dwellers, unconventional parking situations, people without driveways, limited electrical infrastructure in rural environments, and to top it all off, a permitting process that can vary from location to location. And so moving forward with this, one of the best things that you can do is, you know, check on your local jurisdiction's permit streamlining status. Assembly Bill 1236, which was passed in 2017 or 2018, required cities and counties to have a streamlined process for permitting an electric vehicle charging station. And, you know, even though the law went into effect some number of years ago, we're still working on compliance. And so check with your local jurisdictions and make sure that they are up to date with the requirements of AB 1236. Also, highly encourage people to explore non-standard chargers, which look like chargers that are supported with batteries. So they pull power off the grid at a low rate and discharge at a high rate, or chargers that can actually intelligently manage charge being output to vehicles through across a full bank of 10, 20, 30 chargers, which can really help your electricity bill by keeping your overall demand low. And finally, encourage your local contractors, your friends, your family to become EVI, Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program certified, which essentially allows them to go through a formalized process to get a certificate that states, yes, we can work on EV charging stations. We're good at it. This is what we do. So anything that can augment the workforce like that is always a good thing. Excuse me. Next slide, please. And so to kind of circle back and sum things up, Chih-Wei outlined an obvious need for more chargers within the Humboldt County region. And with the new administration and commitments that the Biden administration and Gavin Newsom have expressed in previous weeks, we know that infrastructure funding is going to increase over the coming years. And so to take advantage of that, we highly advise that municipalities and communities come up with goals, game plans, potential site hosts, so that when this funding actually comes available, everyone is ready and able to take advantage of the funding. Start submitting grant applications. You have all of your ducks in a row in order to get those applications for funding in. And as I mentioned earlier, there is about $100,000 remaining in Cal EVIP 2 level 2 fundings with higher rebates available for disadvantaged communities. Work with RCEA, reach out to them, talk with them. They know what they're doing. Great community resource. Take advantage of those level 2 funds. Get your friends, your family looking for potential charging sites. Talk with them, and yeah, get the ball rolling. And I'll turn it over to Chih-Wei or Anh for the next point.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So second point that we want to sum up is it's really important to cooperate and collaborate with your local, powerhouses, but this is just folks or organizations with expertise in an area. So for example, HSU, CR, RCA on a technical side, or electricity infrastructure side, and folks like Humboldt 350, CRTP, or other local sustainability organizations to get some advocacy and outreach and education expertise in, and then organization like Blue Tech Valley to harvest some of that entrepreneur spirit. So everyone working together, it is important to get everyone working together and start get momentum going to think, okay, funds coming, need is going up. How do we get this ball rolling? And I'll pass down to Anh for the last concluding point.
Yeah, thanks, Chih-Wei and Derek. I mean, in the end, we're all here. We all want to promote more electric vehicle also, and electric vehicle adoption and charging infrastructure in Humboldt County. So your voice matters a lot. And I understand that, Humboldt 350 and other organizations that Chih-Wei have mentioned before definitely have a lot of interest in building the infrastructure, the EV infrastructure in the county. So we can continue working with community organization, residents in underserved regions, tribal community, potential site hosts, like Derek mentioned before, build their interests and make sure there's some funding aside for education outreach and explore different sites within the county. So that's some of the 3 main points, and I'll let Chih-Wei bring it, send it to the last
to the moon. But if you're not already excited enough, we are going to leave you with some actions that you can take right after this call too. And there are 4 that we listed right here. First is right. So there's actually a very recent bill that's proposed by Congresswoman Clark to at the federal level provide funding for 200,000 chargers in underserved and disadvantaged areas. The bill was introduced like a month ago, and so you can write to your local representative, in this case Representative Huffman, to co-sponsor the bill. And second action is encourage your local city representative or council or county officials to review and kind of check if the development of their streamlined permitting is going, and how that process is going, because this is going to be important when the funding start coming in. Without that streamlined permitting, you're going to get roadblock after roadblock. But if you have that, it will just help the process a lot. And third, we keep saying this again and again and again, it's about building the community capacity through outreach, education, awareness. Like Derek said, you get the local site hosts excited about charging infrastructure. You get the people excited about what benefit can bring to the local community, local economy, provided open space, shared space. And the last one, if you're policy nerds or EV nerds like us, you can monitor and attend CEC's public workshops. You can find it at energy.ca.gov/events. We also provide the link after this. One of the recent one that just that happened maybe a month ago, I think. It's a workshop on funding allocation for future EV infrastructure projects. They did a fantastic job doing an overview of the previous project that's happened and where the funding has gone to and what had they done with it. And they also talked about some potential upcoming project, which includes specifically rural funding charger for rural areas and specifically programs to fund a charger for apartments. And so I would encourage you to monitor that site, especially for the rural charger programs. When workshop comes up, they always have the public comment section at the end, or you just be in and on the know of what's happening. And the last one, I actually think this is the most exciting part. It's a second charger block grant development. So it's essentially another Cal EVIP, but they're trying to switch up the program design a little bit. So this process is very new. It's currently soliciting administrator for this project. And then we can probably share this slide with Pat or Humboldt 350, and the link will be included. And you can click, they have docket documents talking about how they want to improve the project, the program design, and just a cool process to get involved in, and some of the stuff you can start doing right away. And with that, here's a reference we have and some of the cool arts that we use for icons that we found on the internet, so we should give them credits. And then lastly, I'll leave this up, just a lot more information on how do you incorporate equity into your planning process, a lot of what's happening right now. So the bill we talk about, the Electric Vehicles for Underserved Community Act, that's a draft bill. You can take a look at that. It talks about eligibility, where the money's going to go, and also some of the CEC workshops that we found especially interesting and fun to watch. And with that, thank you so much again for spending your lovely evening with us. And I think we can pass it to Katie now to do some Q&A or discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was great. Really appreciate you the three of you taking the time to present. And this list of actions is incredible. We 350 Humboldt, just putting in a little bit of a plug, we have a pretty active legislative group. So it's wonderful to have some bills to recommend, and definitely some of this stuff going on at the CEC is really exciting. So thank you so much. So we do have a bunch of questions in the chat. So starting with Chip. So you mentioned the Cal EVIP program for funding for charging infrastructure, but Chip's wondering if maybe there are some other rebates, like electricity, sort of maybe cost reductions or other encouragements to install chargers for employees and customers.
Yeah, I can handle that one, I think. So yeah, Chip, it really depends on your service territory, who your utility is, and what programs are active in your particular area. In a lot of utility service territories, they do offer like a specific EV rate that can come in the form of like a time of use rate, where it's higher during the evening hours and kind of lower during the periods of high renewable generation. But I was taking a look at the RCEA rate sheet. Maybe I'm not sure if anyone from RCEA is on and can chime in, but I'm not sure if RCEA offers an EV rate through the CCA program, but PG&E does, I believe. So that can address the lower price per kilowatt hour. In terms of other encouragements, again, it really does depend on what programs are active. For a period of time, all the utilities were running incentive programs, like small incentive programs, where they would give you, $500 if you threw an EV charger in at a business site for a workplace charger, or a smaller amount if you happen to install one at home. But I'm not sure what is going on in PG&E and RCEA territory right now. I've been out of the area for long enough that I've kind of unfortunately lost touch with that. But yeah, hopefully that's kind of an answer-ish. It's unfortunately, it really does depend on where you are. And I see Mihaela and Nancy did post some information in the chat. So thanks Mihaela, thanks Nancy. Sorry for the misinformation on my part.
Great, thanks so much. So we have another question about incentives, and it looks like this question is sort of more geared toward the purchase of a vehicle. Anyone want to give an overview of EV incentives?
Are we talking about like incentives to purchase electric vehicles?
Yes, I think that's the question. Yeah. So instead of charging stations.
There are a lot. I probably won't be able to think of all of them, but big one, starting with federal tax credit, but that depending on which manufacturer of the vehicles you are purchasing from, because there are a few that had run out of their quota. And California itself has the California Clean CVRP, the California rebate programs, and then that I think the max for that one is $2,500. And is there a low income bonus for that one, Derek?
There is a low income bonus for that one.
Right.
That rebate dropped to $2,000 last year.
Right.
And don't forget the Beneficial State Foundation.
The CVAP.
Right.
Program.
So there's the CVAP for lower income, or I believe underserved community as well, when they can provide like a better financing terms, lower interest, and then they help you with like upfront cost. Also, let me know that they just recently used low. They recently used the low carbon fuel standard money to start another new one that everyone can apply for. In a sec, I wrote it down somewhere.
I think that's the clean fuel rebate.
Right. That was like what, $1,500?
$1,500, I believe, and I think that's cash on the hood at time of sale, which is kind
right. Yeah. So there's a lot that you can stack together, and those are all you can stack all of those together. And then,
not to be remiss, but RCEA is lighting up the chat, mentioning that they also are offering EV rebate, which
I saw their video. Right, I saw their video.
Nice.
Yeah.
You guys are ahead of the game. I love it.
Okay, so we also have an interesting question from Dan Chandler, who writes that he read an article about swapping out charge batteries instead of actually having charging stations. So does anyone want to elaborate on that? I've actually never heard of that.
That's a really good question. And yeah, Stephen actually hits right on my response, which is, yeah, it caught on in China because there's a high degree of standardization between vehicles and batteries over there. But on this side or in the United States, I think Tesla was looking at it for a brief period of time and it kind of fizzled out. And I think a couple of other Better Place may have been at one point dabbling in it. But there is such a diversity of vehicles that are sold here that it essentially makes battery swapping cost prohibitive unless there is a degree of standardization that's reached. And not to totally hijack Stephen's response, because it was a great response. But yeah, it seems like every 2 years or so, the charging power going into vehicles jumps by another 100 kilowatts. And so at this point, I think the fastest ones coming onto the market are like 350 kilowatts. In the case of the Porsche Taycan, I'm not sure if the EV6 that Stephen mentioned has one even higher than that. But yeah, it's gotten to the point where the technology is present and has advanced to a sufficient degree that you can replenish a significant amount of range in a very short amount of time, approaching that of a gasoline fueling station. So while I think if there was a time for battery swap standardization, it unfortunately may have passed. But again, that's not to say that there can't be a convergence of technology that provides an opportunity for battery swapping to come into vogue further down the line.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Pat, who says he's driven an EV for 8 years and has never used a public charger after 48,000 miles. Apparently, Pat always uses the EV charger at home and is wondering how unusual this is and how easy it is to get housing developers to install chargers in new housing, and also whether any jurisdictions have required retrofits for installing chargers in existing housing. So lots of questions for Pat.
I can answer part of it. The part about charging at home, actually majority of the people, even if they do charge their public chargers, majority of their energy, to charge the cars is from home chargers if they have access to it. I think average is about 80% of the energy people use to drive around in their electric vehicle is provided by their home charger. So I wouldn't say it's uncommon, and especially if you don't drive too far, that's very likely the case. Unless you go like a road trip or something, then yeah, that's a little different.
And that works great, because I can answer the second part of that question. So with housing developers, especially in new housing, I'm a little rusty on California Green Building Code, but I think the last time I read it, it was required for new developments and extensive retrofits on existing developments that the site has to be EV ready, which basically means that it has to have conduit installed, it has to have raceways and other associated hardware for the purpose of actually installing a dedicated 240 volt outlet for EV charging. That's with new construction. In regards to retrofitting into existing housing, I don't believe there's currently any legislation or codes that require it for existing housing without doing extensive retrofits. But even with new housing and extensive retrofits, it's just EV ready or EV ready. It doesn't have to have a charger mounted to the wall upon completion.
Yeah, I just want to add into that. So far in my research, looking at cities across the US, I don't think any city have really make a big breakthrough in retrofitting old buildings to make sure that they have EV conduit, EV ready building code. So that is something probably many people have been thinking about, and I don't think we have found a concrete solution for that yet. So yeah, just that.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Stevie. Stevie wonders, how much of a barrier is charging time at public chargers? Can you address?
Oh, I think you might have cut out.
I was muted by the host. I don't know. Maybe I accidentally clicked on it. Well, apologies, everyone. So going back to Stevie's comment, he's wondering how much of a barrier charging time is at public chargers. And he's wondering if you'd be able to address various plug types and whether Tesla fast chargers are, so he's heard that Tesla fast chargers have a type of plug that isn't compatible with all EVs.
I can answer the last part first. Tesla superchargers are not compatible with other vehicles, other manufacturers, but their destination chargers, they actually allow people to buy an adapter, then use their destination charger, which actually had a pretty comprehensive coverage US-wide. So that's something people that don't drive a Tesla can look into and consider. You just have to buy an adapter, kind of like Apple, you have to buy a special adapter for everything. So I can answer that part. The first part, how much barrier charging time is to charging itself? Was that the question?
Yeah, I think
Let me see, I can read here too.
Yeah. How much of a barrier is charging time at public charger? So, I mean, I would say it really depends on the location, how much of a barrier is charging time at public chargers. So I understand that, like, I mean, when I started learning about EV 2-3 years ago, the power from these charger about, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Derek, I feel like you know more about this. Like their power is about 150, or I mean like about like 50 kilowatt or so. But then like now chargers powers are getting higher and higher, and then that makes the public charger time going down even more. So eventually these charging time, like the barrier would be getting smaller as the power is getting higher. So that's one way I'm thinking about answering it. Derek, maybe you have more thoughts on it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, like Ayn said, location really matters. So if you're on let's say for instance you're trying to get out of Humboldt, you're heading to the Bay Area, and you've got your Nissan Leaf. You know, if you're on 101 and you want to get to the Bay as fast as possible, which you know you're taking a major thoroughfare, typically a nonstop trip, or you know, very short stop trip in an internal combustion car, in terms of making that trip, kind of putting it on the same footing as an internal combustion car, extremely important. And that's why you see, like Ayn said, there's a whole movement toward 150, 250, 350 kilowatt chargers along major corridors like I-5, the 405 corridor, portions of 101 south of Humboldt County, and even in Humboldt County. Yeah, it's all about minimizing time just kind of sat at a roadside along major thoroughfares. But the narrative kind of shifts when you move into more city centers, places where people already spend time. And so if you have a charger in the Safeway parking lot, you know, it doesn't necessarily, well, I don't know how long folks spend in Safeway. I could spend all day in there if I wanted to, but you know, if you're in Safeway for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, the car is just sitting there charging quietly, and you're just getting a little bit of range. And you know, if it's just tooling around town, that charging time is not really noticed because you're inside doing other things. And that's one of the biggest things with EV charger siting, is co-locating it where people are already wanting to go and spend time. So museums, parks, breweries, that sort of thing. So that's, I hate to do this again, but yeah, the answer unfortunately is it kind of depends on where you are.
Thank you. So, so we have a question from Jerome about planning and modeling for EV charging deployment. So, you know, often we take the approach when we're looking at EV charging station deployment where we develop a target number of public plugs per resident population or service population. And Jerome's wondering, I think, if there's a way to kind of develop this analysis so equity is more important or included within the analysis. So would it make sense to include metrics like median income or median employee wage to improve the target at the census block level? So.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be able to add too much to that, but actually just earlier today, we saw a document that was submitted by Green Lighting Institute specifically to CEC regarding the second block grant. And it talking about having a way to separate out your programs. So one would be focused on regional level, so like the Cali EVIP, but the other one would focus on market segments. So this would be like we're specifically targeting people, say that's lower income or people live in apartments. So that's one thing that comes into mind when I see that. And they also talk about including exactly that, like what Jerome mentioned, information regarding where do you work. So kind of understanding where people are actually going. So incorporating those, because a lot of times when chargers are putting a disadvantaged community, it isn't necessarily serving the disadvantaged group or low income group. So having a way to better understanding who are and who is the ultimate user of that charger, it's important. And probably not answering Jerome's question, but that's some thoughts that pop into my mind.
I kind of just want to add on to that. I mean, another thought I think of is definitely media income plays a big role in determining disadvantaged community, underserved community here. But then one question I think I have some city think about is people move around. So like this area, the development in the area also kind of play into planning more equitable. Like if an area of town just suddenly become more gentrified, what does that mean for that community there? Is it still technically a disadvantaged community? And that's a question that a lot of city does have. So yeah, I'm just throwing like an interesting tidbit in there to think about designing it more equitable. And there's a lot of factors in there that we to think about beside just the income, because that is also it's ever changing too.
Yeah, I love that example you gave, Aina, about actually having, residents in a community fill out a survey and say where they would like chargers to be. I thought that was really interesting approach. Thank you. So we have another question from Jerome. Can you distribute your slide deck, or will you? Cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. So Bob wonders, is Humboldt County considered underserved or disadvantaged in the proposed federal legislation?
So the text, the proposed bill text, only briefly talk about eligibility. So it talk about it can be disadvantaged, can be low income or community of color, or locations where there's currently low charger. They didn't define exactly how they defined the low charger, but one thing came to mind is maybe like density or something. And then also like a case-by-case frontier community means the location is going to be disproportionately impacted by climate change, or even COVID, I think was one of them, that the COVID economic impact. So they actually cast a pretty wide net in terms of how they define a disadvantage, which is great. And then I know a lot of Humboldt folks might be a little angry when they learned that Humboldt isn't part of a disadvantaged community, at least according to the Cabin Viral screen. So I think this one, at least as written right now, it should include at least parts of Humboldt County.
Thank you. So we have a comment from Nancy Stevenson. Also thanking Ayn for comments about getting feedback from the public. And Nancy asks, how have you seen the surveys be most successful?
So far, I would say, like based on my experience, surveys are just like a part of the big equation on trying to engage with the local community. And I think a lot of time it is more successful when you actually do in-person in local community planning. And this is kind of go back to the Blue LA example I have. One of the lesson learned is to actually have public engagement surveys right at the spot when you actually work with the community in person. I can't think of like on the spot right now if there's just like surveys by itself sending out to the community, if it's actually great success. I mean, like by doing that, you have the chance to look a little bit into what the community think, but I don't think it has been effective in actually like knowing all the voices within the community. So that's my very kind of like didn't really hit on if I can think of any successful surveys right now, but I can get back to that if I find anything.
Thanks, Anh. So we have a question or comment from Stephen regarding lobbying the city and county to develop requirements for EV charging in new development, especially low income development. So thank you, Stephen. Just wanted to give a shout out for that comment. Yes, absolutely. So just want to flag that we're at 8:10, and I don't want to go on for too long, but it looks like we do have several more questions and comments. Let's see, scrolling down, apologies. So Andreas asks, what role, if any, do you see for Caltrans to help develop an EV charger network?
I think Caltrans is actually starting to roll chargers out. I'm waiting for the website to load here. Yes, they have. Interesting. They have a couple out in Southern California, and I might be hallucinating this, but I thought I saw somewhere that they were partnering with a solar charging manufacturer to put charging stations along Interstate 5. That might be Electrify America now that I'm thinking about it. In terms of a role for Caltrans, honestly, I think any sort of, this is just my personal opinion, but any sort of charging network that is maintained by a single entity and rolled out for public use and made convenient and available is nothing but a good thing. The more chargers we can have out there blanketing the Western United States, the country, the world, the better. The fewer dead spots we'll have. I know that the one Caltrans charger that I know of is a DC fast charger that was badly needed in the Tejon Pass area, and that was a godsend, even if it is broken sometimes. But it is there. It is functional most of the time, and it proved to be the difference between my coworker and I getting out of San Diego to a site visit that we had pre-COVID and us getting stranded on the side of the road. So I will eternally be grateful to Caltrans for that. But yeah, long story short, whoever is willing and able to put chargers in, maintain them, and keep them a public good is all right in my book.
All right, well, that's actually a great note to end on. I think it looks like we are out of questions, and we're a little bit over time. So thanks so much to everyone for sticking around. And thanks so much to Chih-Wei, Derek, and Anh for joining us again. We really appreciate it. And if this weren't a big Zoom call, we'd have a round of applause. But if you'd like, yeah, definitely get those clapping emojis out there. Thanks so much to everyone, and to our co-sponsors and attendees. If you'd like, you can find a recording on our website, world.350.org/Humboldt. And again, please do sign up, and we'd love to hear from you. And have a wonderful rest of your evening, everyone.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you, everyone.
Night. Thanks.
Thank you all.